LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 4th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. As usual, I picked out the weekend's best, 13 this week, 13 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all tonight. Given the topic of all the shows, which were the shootings, the mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, there's not really political comedy per se, although I will show you a series of unfortunate events that occurred on Meet the Press this morning that were sort of comical, and they also serve as the source of the title of the video, "The End of Now?" ? That is something that Chuck Todd says not about any of the news, but just about the problem he's having. But it seems to me that it's almost like a question for our times. You know, it's like when I hear about more of these shootings or more, racial incitement from the President of the United States, I just keep asking myself, is it the end of now yet? Is it the end of now yet? And I just keep waiting for the end of now, but it's still now. And anyway, I don't know. It's kind of a philosophical title, but most of the clips after that, well, there'll be the news summaries, and then I will have 5 different Democratic presidential candidates giving their reaction, various levels of blame to Trump's rhetoric for creating the white nationalism climate that was sort of the basis of the El Paso shooting, apparently. So I'll have the 4 Bs and a C. I'll have Beto, Bernie, Buttigieg, and Booker, along with Julián, Castro. And then I'll have a couple Republicans at the end, White House acting chief of staff Mick Mulvaney, and the only remaining African-American Republican in Congress after Will Hurd resigns at the end of this term. That's Senator Tim Scott. That'll be the last clip. So a couple Republicans after all those Democrats. But like I said, I'm starting with a series of unfortunate events on Meet the Press when Chuck Todd was, after all the problems that MSNBC and Chuck Todd on the MSNBC debates had, all the technical problems they had, I don't know what's going on with NBC and MSNBC with the technical problems, but apparently they had one getting Mick Mulvaney on today, and then additional ones, and if you listen carefully, you will hear my title, "The End of Now," in the, somewhat comical beginning clip for the day over here.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by the White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. Mr. Mulvaney, welcome back to Meet the Press. Oh, okay. It looks like we lost our satellite connection there with Mr. Mulvaney. Let me bring in today's panel that we have with us. We have Casey Hunt, our chief White House correspondent, Eddie Glaude Jr. from Princeton University, Pat McGrory, the former North Carolina governor, Eliana Johnson of Politico. Welcome. This is one of those mornings, a lot of breaking news, a lot of moving parts here. Casey Hunt, Capitol Hill, the immediate response here politically. And we are back. Look, I'm just going to be open and transparent. If we can get the White House Chief of Staff and we fix our satellite issue, we will have him before the end of now. I have the panel here. Casey Hunt, this idea of, we've been talking about that the FBI, this came up in an FBI hearing literally 10 days ago. Let me play Christopher Wray. And we don't have that quote on that front. But he was asked about this, and he admitted that, yes, this is now a threat.
So, yeah, I don't mean to make fun of Meet the Press, but they on NBC, they did seem to have a lot of technical problems. One thing nowhere during the 6 a.m. version of Meet the Press that I watched did they ever get Mick Mulvaney on, but when I watched the replay on MSNBC, I noticed they did have an interview with Mick Mulvaney that they must have sort of like cut in later when they finally got the feed. I didn't take any clips from that interview because I watched the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos interview. Well, it's actually Jonathan Karl did the interview, and he pretty much said the same thing, and that's my second to last clip I will be showing you, which reminds me, by the way, if you look down in the video description, you'll see a link to my clip list. You can follow along my list of 13 clips. These are the notes I use to remind myself what's in each clip that I want to talk about, so if you want to follow along with my somewhat cryptic notes, also the source of all the clips down in the video description. Basically, anything you really want to know, down in the video description. And there is a lot that's not known about these shootings. More is getting, throughout the day, more came out about the Dayton, Ohio shooting. But even early on with Meet the Press, which I think is the first show to record, already some things were known about the domestic terrorism in El Paso, which is what they call it on NBC and CNN, not so much on Fox News, as you'll see later. And this is all the news summaries are about 2 minutes long. I'm about to show you 4 of them, and we can compare NBC, CNN, ABC, and Fox News, starting with Meet the Press over here.
Welcome to a tough Sunday morning for America. The plague of mass shootings in the country has now reached an almost incomprehensible moment. Twice now in less than 24 hours, we've seen massacres in 2 American cities with a death toll in the dozens. First, in what appears to be an act of domestic terrorism in El Paso, Texas, a majority Hispanic city on the Mexico border, a 21-year-old gunman walked into a Walmart with a military assault rifle and opened fire on shoppers, killing at least 20 and wounding more than 24 others.
Go! Come on! Hands up, hands up!
As of this morning, the death toll in El Paso puts this mass shooting among the 10 worst in American history. Here's how witnesses described that scene.
Kind of sounded like fireworks, and then they started coming closer together, like the shots were going doo, 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 doo.
I heard a lot of yelling. There was cops with guns, and they're saying, "Get on your knees."
I helped a little girl that was full of blood, and then the mother came around the corner and she was shot in the chest.
The killer, who appears to be a white nationalist, was captured and placed into custody. He posted an essay online referring to Hispanic invaders and praised the murderer of 51 people in mosques earlier this year in Christchurch, New Zealand. It's also worth noting that last week we asked whether President Trump's racial resentment rhetoric was a political issue for Republicans. Now we have to ask whether his harsh words are actually inspiring violence. As if that weren't enough to comprehend, we woke up this morning to the news that at least 9 more people were killed and many more wounded and taken to area hospitals in a shooting overnight in Dayton, Ohio. The shooter, who was wearing body armor and a mask, was killed by police. Add these 2 horrible incidents to the shooting last week in Gilroy, California, and we are looking at one of the most deadly and emotionally unsettling weeks of violence in recent American history. In fact, more Americans were killed in mass shootings in the past 24 hours than American troops were killed in Afghanistan in 2017 and 2018 combined. We've got both stories covered this morning. We're going to begin with our justice correspondent here at NBC News, Pete Williams, who joins me now.
And they all had additional reporting that I'm not going to show, but I want to show the news summaries that the anchors did at the beginning of each. There will actually be a little bit of a news reporter in the Fox News Sunday one because I'm going to criticize that one a little more as usual. But you did see domestic terrorism, and over on CNN State of the Union also calling it terror in El Paso. CNN State of the Union, one of the reasons, the main reason my show is so delayed today is because usually CNN State of the Union plays live at 6 a.m. and then replays a repeat at 9 a.m. where I am. Well, today there were 4 live hours of State of the Union, 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 9 a.m., and 10 a.m. I had to go through all 4, that there were like different interviews in all 4 of the hours. Although I noticed they replayed the Beto O'Rourke interview in the second 2 hours and still said it was live, but it was it was like a mistake. That is one of my criticisms of CNN State of the Union. And every hour, you know how Jake Tapper always starts off the State of the Union is, and you'll see here it's horrified and enraged. But each of the 4 hours, if I had a little more time, I would have edited the 4 together, because it was a different State of the Union each of the 4 hours. But the news summary was pretty much the same, and this is the 2-minute news summary from CNN State of the Union that I will talk with you a little more about after we watch together over here.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is a combination of horrified and enraged. Enraged by the lack of effort by our leaders to do anything about that, which continues to horrify us, which today is the latest awful news. 2 mass shootings in this country, about 13 hours apart. First, on Saturday, a massacre in El Paso, Texas. A 21-year-old gunman, terrorist, opened fire at a Walmart, killing at least 20 people and injuring at least 26. That suspect is in custody, and the FBI has opened a domestic terrorism investigation, according to a source familiar with the investigation. Authorities are investigating a document posted online and believed to have been written by the suspected terrorist. The document is filled with white nationalist language and racist hatred towards immigrants and specifically towards Latinos. And then, as if that weren't horrifying enough, shortly after 1 a.m. on Sunday morning, a gunman opened fire outdoors in a Dayton, Ohio business and entertainment district, killing at least 9 innocent people and injuring 26. That gunman wore body armor and fired what's called a long gun and was killed by police less than a minute after the shooting started, authorities say. Moments ago, President Trump tweeted out prayers for the people of El Paso and the people of Dayton. Yesterday, he called the El Paso shooting, quote, an act of cowardice. This morning, lawmakers and presidential candidates already are beginning to call for change. We're going to talk with at least 4 presidential candidates today about what they would do to stop this epidemic of mass shootings and shootings. We should note that we invited the Republican governor, lieutenant governor, and both Republican U.S. senators representing Texas to join us this morning. They all declined. The Republican governor of Ohio also declined. We also asked the White House to provide someone to discuss these shootings. That request, too, was declined. Joining me now, former congressman from El Paso and 2020 Democratic President.
And I will have a clip from that Beto O'Rourke interview. Like I said, they replayed that later, but they still showed it as live, even though I'm positive I watched. They were like, there's one part where he says he doesn't understand the question. I mean, I think that's even the one that I'm going to show. And they replayed that. It was the same. I don't understand the question. So I'm sure it wasn't a re-interview, which also has its own problems journalistically, where you like, could you do a second interview of the same person like 2 hours later, ask them the same questions? It's like you're giving them too much time to think, I guess, or I don't know. I guess maybe that wouldn't be a journalistic problem. But like I said, I thought both those last 2 news summaries were good. They both mentioned terrorism. This next one doesn't so much focus on the facts as this is Jonathan Karl. It's like he took it as a writing assignment. He like wrote up this heartfelt essay that, you know, it's difficult to find the words, and then he obviously spent a lot of time trying to find the right words, and I think it's actually pretty well written and put together. Another 2-minute news summary from ABC, very different from the last 2, more, like I said, of an essay than a news summary over here.
Jonathan Karl.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It's difficult to find the words to describe this moment in time. I could rattle off the sickening statistics about gun violence in America. Over the last 5 years, we have endured 5 of the 10 deadliest mass shootings in modern American history. I could list the cities and towns now synonymous with tragedy. We've heard all of that before, after Newtown and Sutherland Springs and Parkland, Charleston, Orlando, and Pittsburgh, after Aurora, Virginia Tech, and Columbine, Pearl, and Paducah. The condemnation, the calls to action, the thoughts and prayers, and the horror coming again. This is a uniquely American problem. Words don't do justice to the pain and the fear and the anger and the frustration these attacks cause. We don't know what to say to make sense of what happened or to get us closer to a solution, so we will start with what we do know. the facts on the ground at this hour. Over the past 24 hours, 2 more American cities were added to that terrible list. Overnight, 9 human beings were shot and killed in Dayton, Ohio. More than a dozen hospitalized. The shooter there died at the scene. That horror came less than 12 hours after a Walmart in El Paso was turned into a war zone. A lone gunman stormed the crowded store, killing 20 people, wounding more than 24 others. That shooter was taken into custody. We'll know soon whether authorities will call this shooting a hate crime, but this much is already perfectly clear. This was an attack on the Hispanic community. This Walmart is popular with Mexican immigrants and Mexican citizens who cross the border to do their shopping. In fact, on a clear day, you can see into Mexico from the parking lot. I'm joined by ABC's Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas.
And so you see John Karl there at the end after, like I said, the heartfelt essay. He says they don't know yet whether it's a hate crime, but talks about it being an attack on the Hispanic community, all the Mexicans that shop there. You know, there's almost like a Sarah Palin thing. They can see Mexico from their house or whatever. But the contrast, I think, is pretty clear with the Fox News Sunday news summary. Chris Wallace does mention the possibility of a hate crime, nothing about terrorism, nothing about it being anti-immigrant till the very end. You'll see he turns it over to the reporter here, Jeff Paul, who talks like very briefly about the manifesto at the end, the shooter's manifesto in terms of the motive, even though I think they pretty much all had the same facts when they did these 2-minute news summaries. This is actually the longest one, 2.5 minutes, the last of the news summaries, before I get to 2 Bernie Sanders, a Beto O'Rourke, a Cory Booker, a Pete Buttigieg, a Julián Castro, and 2 Republicans at the end. But here's Republican news. Like I said, this is like written with the spin you would want from the Republican point of view, I think, as I'll discuss with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Hello again from Fox News in Washington. We start with breaking news. A second mass shooting in the U.S. in less than 24 hours. At least 10 people dead, including the shooter, and 16 injured in Dayton, Ohio. It happened overnight outside a bar. And in El Paso, at least 20 dead and more than 24 injured at a Walmart, packed with as many as 3,000 shoppers. Authorities are investigating it as a possible hate crime. In a moment, we'll speak with El Paso Mayor Dee Margo. But first, correspondent Jeff Paul has the latest. Jeff.
Chris, hours and hours after this mass shooting first started, and authorities are still on scene here at the Walmart in El Paso.
It was chaos. People started running all over the place, and it's the most horrific thing.
A Walmart packed with an estimated 3,000 shoppers in El Paso, now the site of one of the deadliest mass shootings in modern American history.
At first, it was just like, do. So I knew it wasn't a handgun because of how loud it was from them being outside.
Investigators say shortly after 10:30 a.m. local time, a 21-year-old white male started shooting. Police arrived within minutes, taking the suspected shooter into custody without firing a single shot. The victims ranging from ages of just 2 years old to people in their 80s.
I've been here 22 years. This is by far the biggest shooting event that I've been involved in.
The shooting in El Paso, one of now 3 mass shootings in the span of a week. 3 were killed in Gilroy, California at a garlic festival last Sunday, the latest happening in Dayton early Sunday morning.
We had one shooter that we are aware of and multiple victims. Right now the shooter is deceased from gunshot wounds from the responding officers.
Back in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott is doing his best to console a community, a city, and a state now in mourning.
We, as a state, unite in support of these victims and their family members.
Right now, investigators are looking at a manifesto and trying to confirm if it was written, in fact, by the shooter. In it, officials have described language that is racist and anti-immigrant, but police haven't elaborated any further. Chris?
Jeff, thank you. Joining us now, the mayor of
So there was a little bit about the anti-immigrant sentiment at the end, but I think that they tried to make some Republican officials, like Governor Abbott of Texas and others, try to look good and try to downplay some of the problems that the Republicans have with the fomenting. That brings me to my next clip here. Here's the Bernie Sanders clip, the first of the two Bernie Sanders clips from CNN State of the Union. Jake Tapper asking Bernie Sanders about a tweet that he put up about the climate of violent extremism promoted by Donald Trump. And what I like about, I think Bernie has one of the best answers here, because he starts off, actually, I think maybe giving Trump too much credit, saying, I'm sure he doesn't want to see anybody shot or killed, which, I don't know, I'm not positive that, I would probably give him the benefit of the doubt, but I wouldn't say I was sure. And so he starts off saying, I don't think he's responsible and that he wants this to happen, but he has to understand that what he's doing is creating the climate. And then he talks about it. And then he also talks about some of his solutions for gun violence. And actually, this clip is, I've edited that together with a clip later in the interview where he again repeats the same thing about Trump not being to blame in response to what some of the other presidential candidates have said. Trump not being to blame while still giving his rhetoric a lot of blame, which I'll discuss with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Senator, under these conditions, it's horrible to bring you in to talk about this, but thank you for doing so. Two mass shootings within 13 hours. You tweeted just a few minutes ago, quote, "Mr. President, stop your racist, hateful, and anti-immigrant rhetoric. Your language creates a climate which emboldens violent extremists." Could you elaborate on more what you mean by that tweet?
Look, I am sure that President Trump does not want anybody in this country to go around shooting other people. But what he has got to understand is that when you have language that is racist, that is virulently anti-immigrant, there are mentally unstable people in this country who see that as a sign to do terrible, terrible things. So I think the president has got to stop that racism and that xenophobia immediately. Second of all, Jake, I think the issue of the moment is whether the NRA will continue to determine gun policy in America, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of the American people, gun owners and non-gun owners, want common sense gun safety legislation. So what I have asked Mitch McConnell, Republican leader of the Senate, bring us back to Washington, end the recess right now, and let us sit down and work on the kind of legislation that we need. The truth of the matter is the American people want to expand background checks. They want to end the so-called gun show loophole. They want to, in many cases, ban assault weapons. And my own view is we may want to be thinking about treating assault weapons the same way we treat machine guns today, having very strict license requirements for them. We want to make sure that we end the process by which people can legally walk into a gun show, buy all of the guns that they want, and then sell those guns to criminal elements. So there's a lot to be worked on. But I think the American people are sick and tired of the NRA determining gun policy in America.
As you know, CNN has learned that a Twitter account linked to the suspected terrorist in El Paso was sharing and retweeting some of President Trump's tweets and postings about the border wall. Now, President Trump has condemned the shooting, and if that so-called manifesto that's screed by the accused shooter was his, when I believe law enforcement says they think it is his, he does say, I felt this way long before President Trump. But given that, what do you make of the fact that he was retweeting some of President Trump's tweets about the wall and such?
Look, I mean, clearly, Donald Trump does not want anybody shooting down innocent people. You know, Trump and I disagree on everything, but I'm not going to suggest to you for 1 second that that is what Trump wants. But what he has to understand in a nation where you have many, many thousands of people who are mentally unstable, that when you talk about invasions and hordes of people, and when you talk about Mexicans as criminals and rapists and the country under siege, you have unstable people who are going to see that as a sign that they have got to take up arms and do the horrific things that we just saw in El Paso. So look, bottom line is, if there is any silver lining in this horrible, horrible, horrible period in American history, it is that all of us, conservatives, progressives, Republicans, Democrats, independents, have got to come together and think our way through this. But the bottom line is the NRA is way, way, way out of touch with where the American people are on the issue of gun safety. Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump have got to stand up to the NRA, and let's sit down and figure out a path forward that protects the American people. Now, you know, one of the things, Jake, that bothers me so much is that you got kids who will soon be going back to school. And these kids are traumatized by these events. They're worried that when they go into a school, which should be a place of learning, a place where kids enjoying each other, and now they're frightened. So don't underestimate the trauma that this has on children and all Americans. This is a major, major issue, and we have got to come together to resolve it.
So I thought that was a good answer. Some good solutions there from Bernie Sanders, talking about making so-called assault weapons harder to obtain, more like you have semi-automatic rifles like that, as difficult to obtain as automatic rifles, you know, machine guns. I mean, people will tell you, you know, like a revolver is a semi-automatic, meaning you just keep pulling the trigger and it keeps shooting. You don't have to reload. But it's not just the fact that you keep pulling the trigger and it keeps shooting. It has to do with the caliber of the bullets, the speed, you know, with the longer rifles and I mean, if you know anything about physics, the damage that the projectile does is a function of the mass of the bullet, that's, you know, the caliber, and then the speed that it's moving when it hits. And these fire like these large caliber bullets at really high speeds that like destroy people's bodies when they hit them, and that's why they're so deadly. And using those different specifications, you could say that, you know, bullets can only be so big and they can only fire so fast in terms of the speed of the bullet, and so fast in terms of how, you know, like in that second shooting, they got him after like 24 seconds and he shot like 30 people in Dayton, Ohio. So the speed, you know, the rapidity of the firing also can be controlled. So there are a lot of things that could be controlled, and Bernie had good answers for some of that. Like I said, he was right to start off going farther than I might and giving Trump the benefit of the doubt of not wanting to see people shot down. Jake Tapper brought up that thing about the tweets, about the El Paso shooter retweeting Trump's tweets. And he was the only one to do that in the news shows. I think I saw some story that someone with control of Trump's Twitter feed, maybe his social media manager, Dan Scavino, but who knows, went through and deleted his tweets where he referred to immigrants as invaders. I don't know if those are the same tweets that the El Paso shooter retweeted, but if that's true, that's, I guess, some sort of consciousness of guilt, maybe. I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section. This next clip is another thing that Jake Tapper asked about, that he was the only one to talk about, you know, in terms of the manifesto and the theory that drove this shooter in El Paso. Apparently was this replacement theory, the same thing that drove the Pittsburgh shooter at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. This idea that Jews are bringing in immigrants to replace white Americans. It's replacement theory. You remember those people marching with the torches yelling, "Jews will not replace us, Jews will not replace us." Well, they weren't actually, the chant wasn't saying we don't want to be replaced by Jews. have Jews take our places. It's actually this whole replacement theory that Jews are bringing in, the brown people to replace us, to get rid of white America. And Jake Tapper actually asks Bernie Sanders about that, and asks him about it as the possible first Jewish president. Of course, Jake Tapper is Jewish, so it's sort of like a Jew to Jew. He pulls the Jew card, I guess, in a way, to ask this question. And right before this, I cut out a part where Bernie Sanders answered a question saying, yes, Trump is a white nationalist and a racist, and there's a lot of evidence of that. And so that's sort of the lead up to this clip, but I thought this was a really interesting clip that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
If you don't mind my asking a personal question, because I know you're not really one for that, but after the Tree of Life shooting, which was also part of this deranged white supremacist theory of Jews bringing in Latinos to commit white genocide on this country, so this was no longer a white country. Again, this is an insane conspiracy theory from the far fringes of the fever swamps of the internet. But that was what motivated the Tree of Life terrorist against Jews. You would be the first Jewish president. And I'm wondering if you feel less comfortable, less safe in America today than you did 10 or 20 years ago.
Jake, it's not only Jews, and you're right. I went to that synagogue in Pittsburgh and talked to the rabbi there. And what a horrible shooting that was. It is the African-American community that had to deal with the mowing down of people in a church in their community. It is the Muslim community today. The terrible attack on a mosque in Australia. I was at a mosque in meeting with Muslim leaders in Los Angeles. It is the Latino community. It is the gay community. And I mean, again, we can disagree on healthcare and the environment and educational policies, but there should not be a moment in American history where we have a president who is very deliberately trying to divide us up based on our religion, based on where we came from, based on the color of our skin. That is so un-American. That is so much against everything that I was led to believe, you were led to believe, the American people were led to believe about what this country stands for, And we have got to get over that. And I hope that Trump understands that maybe he's got to change the way he is doing things. And I hope very much that Mitch McConnell will have the courage to bring us back to Washington and put together legislation which has the wide support of the American people. This is not radical stuff. This is what the American people want. They want expanded background checks. They want to end the gun show loophole. They want to end the straw man provision. Many people want to ban assault weapons. Maybe we should go further. But we have got to come together as a people, and we cannot let the NRA dominate the discussion.
Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much for joining us on this horrible day.
So there you see Bernie Sanders answering the replacement theory question, and he actually pivots away from the Jew thing to, I guess he's learned from running for president 4 years ago, to try to name all the different groups he wants to vote for him. It's not just about Jews. It's about all the people I want to vote for me, or that was the first part there. Although he did make one mistake, but whatever. I mean, Australia, New Zealand, pretty much the same thing, right? Or no, I don't mean that at all. I actually have viewers in both Australia and New Zealand, and I appreciate both sets of viewers and their differences. But you saw Bernie Sanders got the mosque shooting in New Zealand. Said it was in Australia, but nobody's perfect. Not even Bernie Sanders. Not even Saint Bernie is perfect. So there you go. There's that. And speaking of people who aren't perfect, the next clip is former member of Congress Beto O'Rourke, and he actually is from El Paso. He represented El Paso in Congress. So I guess this was a dark moment, but it was a crisis opportunity for him to speak, and he did get a lot of play calling Trump racist. I didn't find his answers that compelling. I I've never been a big Beto O'Rourke fan, but you can let me know down in the comment section why you think I'm wrong about that if you think I am wrong. But I decided to give him, since he was a big player in the news coverage, and you'll see, I think, did I already show Bernie Sanders responding to Beto O'Rourke? I can't remember who responds to who, but multiple people responded to what Beto O'Rourke said, and about Trump being racist, and I guess he got a little bit of media exposure for saying things like you're going to hear. And this is where he doesn't understand the question. I don't understand why he doesn't understand over here.
Our power to make sure that it is not.
So, Congressman, you wrote on Twitter and said publicly in El Paso, President Trump's racism does not just offend our sensibilities, it fundamentally changes the character of this country and it leads to violence.
Sorry, I remember why he doesn't understand the question, because he brings up something that you saw him bring up with Bernie that I forgot to mention in the previous clip, where apparently the El Paso shooter, although he quoted a lot of Trump's rhetoric, said that I felt this way long before Trump. Don't blame Trump. Don't blame anyone or whatever. I haven't read the manifesto. I don't really plan to, but that's the thing that Beto O'Rourke doesn't understand, which it still makes sense as a question, but I'll talk more about Beto after we watch that clip together over here.
Our power to make sure that it is not.
So, Congressman, you wrote on Twitter and said publicly in El Paso, President Trump's racism does not just offend our sensibilities, it fundamentally changes the character of this country and it leads to violence. Now, the document that this terrorist in El Paso, that law enforcement is investigating whether or not he actually posted this document, which refers to Latinos coming to the country as an invasion, which, as you noted, is language that we've heard from the President of the United States. It also says, and I know, it's hard to make sense of any of this stuff, but it also says that he had this ideology before President Trump. He kind of anticipated, assuming this document's real, the alleged terrorist anticipated that people would blame President Trump for it and said, I felt this way before President Trump.
I don't know the point that you're trying to make here, Jake, but it's pretty obvious to me and anyone who's listened to the president and will look at the facts that his anti-immigrant rhetoric, not just the things that I cited, but calling asylum seekers animals or an infestation. Now, you might describe a cockroach or termites as an infestation, something less than human. You might hear someone in the Third Reich describe a given people based on their characteristic as an infestation or subhuman. But that's what the President of the United States is doing right now. And it's not just with Mexican immigrants, conflating Congresswoman Ilhan Omar with the terrorists from 9/11, encouraging that chanting in North Carolina of send her back. Let's not mince words right now. This president is encouraging greater racism, and not just the racist rhetoric, but the violence that so often follows. This shooter in the manifesto cites in part for his inspiration the shooter in Christchurch, New Zealand, who cites Donald Trump as his inspiration. This anti-immigrant rhetoric, and again, it is not just President Trump, but he's certainly, as the person in the position of greatest public trust and power, most responsible for it. This is Fox News. This is what we're seeing on the internet. This is the toleration of intolerance and hatred and racism in this country. This is what is causing what we are seeing here today, and it will continue to happen unless we call it out and unless we change it.
The FBI Director, Christopher Wray, has warned.
So, I don't know, he called out Fox News. I always like people who call out Fox News, but other than that, I didn't think that Beto O'Rourke rose to the occasion any more than, it just seemed like his, whatever. Like I said, I'm not really a fan. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I'm not also that much of a fan of Cory Booker. I talked a little bit about his record not really cleaning up some of the problems in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey, when he was mayor there. Not cleaning up some of the problems with the police when that came up. and that got brought up again in the debate this last week. By the way, I had hoped to cover the debate, but I had this ACLU meeting I've been planning for a couple months is coming up this Friday, and I had to do all these things that conflicted with covering the debates. And then I saw all these people getting massive copyright strikes, and I was thinking, do I want to like stay up all night to make a video no one's going to see because CNN's going to do copyright strikes? And I mean, I would fight the CNN copyright strikes most weeks, but it's been a long week. It's been a long day. Maybe in the fall, the next time it comes up. And I do plan to do live clip roundups of the debates. But anyway, Cory Booker did pretty well in the debates, I guess, up against Biden. And here you can hear, here is Cory Booker making a lot of the same points you just heard from Beto O'Rourke, but I think it in a more compelling way. And still blaming Trump more than, I think there should be a caveat in there, like Bernie Sanders said a couple times in the clip I showed before about how, we give him the benefit of the doubt that he doesn't actually want to cause this violence, but he has to understand that his rhetoric is making it more possible. And anyway, here's Cory Booker making that point over here.
Come back to Meet the Press, and I know on the issue of guns, I think nobody has a more aggressive plan to try to tackle it than you. But I want to set the policy prescriptions aside for a minute and just simply, how do you assess of what we're going through in the last 24 hours, what we've seen, particularly in El Paso, sir?
Obviously, we all are grieving for the victims, for their families, and for the people who are going to have very painful, long roads of recovery from gun violence. Mm-hmm. I just want to speak with moral clarity right now because I worry that we're having conversations that don't just focus on an understanding that we are all responsible to each other in this country. We have moral bonds and fabric of our country. We have a president of the United States who is particularly responsible. I, in my faith, have this idea that you reap what you sow, and he is sowing seeds of hatred in our country, and this harvest of hate violence that we're seeing right now lies at his feet. When you have the president from the highest moral office in our land talking about invasions and infestations and shithole countries, the kind of things that come out of his mouth that so harm the moral fabric of our nation, he is responsible. He's responsible when he has taken no action whatsoever to even condemn white supremacy, even when his own FBI is talking about this being sourcing major parts of our problem. So we have a president who is responsible, who is not taking that responsibility and is doing nothing to address the deepening crisis in our country of this kind of violence.
Okay, what can he do?
So you tell me what you think, but in my opinion, I think Cory Booker basically just gave the same answer that Beto O'Rourke gave in the previous clip, but he gave it better. It was Booker bettered Beto. What do you think? Is that true? Not true? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And moving on now to the Buttigieg clip, I think he also did a good job, and he has like a little jiu-jitsu move here that I really appreciated as a longtime Fox News viewer. I remember in the Obama years how there was this like drumbeat over and over again that, Obama wouldn't say radical Islamic terrorism when there was terrorism that Muslims participated in. And he actually had a reason. As the president of the United States, he was trying to fight the terrorism using these allies, including like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Jordan and other Muslim countries that didn't like using the word Islamic next to terrorist if they're going to help in the fight. And so even though it was, accurate, although it's not accurate to blame that terrorism on all of Islam, but, radical Islamic terrorism, but that's why Obama wouldn't say it. And I heard that over and over again on Fox News. Well, Pete Buttigieg has it all like, he does like this jiu-jitsu move and turns it all around so that now it's Trump and Fox News who won't say what the real problem is. They won't name it, so they can't fix it, which is what they kept saying on Fox News about radical Islamic terrorism. And here's Pete Buttigieg going on Fox News Sunday and hoisting them on their own petard, so to speak, over here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
After the terrible shooting in El Paso yesterday, you said that this country is under attack from homegrown, violent, white nationalism. Explain, sir.
Well, this is terrorism, and we have to name it as such. It is very clear that the loss of American life in Charleston, in San Diego, in Pittsburgh, by all appearances now in El Paso too, is symptomatic of the effects of white nationalist terrorism. We cannot keep America safe from this threat to the American people if we're not prepared to name it and confront it. We need an administration that is ready to do that, and we can't keep pretending that this is just random or that this is something we can't confront. What you have here is two things coming together. One, the weak gun safety policies of this country, and two, the rise of domestic terrorism inspired by white nationalists. We need to acknowledge that this is a problem, that American lives are at risk, and we got to do something about it.
At least one of the other Democratic presidential candidates, Beto O'Rourke, has said that President Trump and his rhetoric bear some responsibility for the acts of this madman. Do you think that's fair?
Well, there's no question that white nationalism is condoned at the highest levels of our government. You know, when this kind of rhetoric happened 20 years ago, when David Duke was trying to run for office as a Republican, the Republican Party was horrified. They couldn't run away fast enough. Right now, you see it being echoed by the White House, and there is a measure of responsibility that you just can't get away from when you have, you know, case after case of racial rhetoric coming out of the White House. And then when you have an actual incident of white nationalist terrorism like the killing in Charlottesville related to people saying Jews will not replace us, and the president saying he got very fine people there, of course this is part of a climate where people who are in the grip of this hateful extremist ideology feel validated, and they feel validated from all the way at the top, and that is part of our problem.
After each mass shooting.
Well, that was like a breath of truth sweeping through Fox News that doesn't necessarily get in there a lot. I mean, I heard a lot of people responding to the Trump rhetoric saying, well, he doesn't like illegal immigration, but that doesn't mean he's anti-immigrant. I heard so many people on Fox News say that in the last 24 hours. And have they listened to what Trump has said? And they assume, of course, asylum seekers are legal immigrants. And anyway, I thought Pete Buttigieg did a really good job, like I said, bringing up topics you don't hear on Fox News, and also using their cudgel against them about, like, you got to name it to fix it. So that was a good job there. He was on another show. I didn't take the clip. I think it was on CNN State of the Union, because that was like during one of the 4 hours where I was too tired, I don't know, but where he talked about how we have to draw the line. He said, we all agree that everyone should be able to have water balloons and no one should be able to have nuclear bombs. And where we draw the line between that on the right to bear arms, that's, you know, maybe we need to make it a little tighter than it is now. I thought that was another good soundbite from him that I didn't take a clip from, I wanted to mention. And then this next clip, Julián Castro, the last of the Democrats, is actually kind of like the Beto and the Booker clips, where he's talking about the responsibility of Trump for, you know, the racist climate and rhetoric. And I just put it last because Castro doesn't start with a B, so it's the 4 B's and the C. And the C being Julián Castro, who actually, of all the lower tier candidates, he's the one I'm most hoping makes it into the third debate. And I'll talk about that a little more before we get to the Republicans and after we watch this last Democrat together over here.
The FBI director has said that this is a particular problem right now in the United States.
The President of the United States has not.
In addition,
the President of the United States has not. Right, we've had the director of the FBI has acknowledged that there is a rise in white nationalism that's tied to domestic terrorism. The president has not. Is there any constructive role he can play, or because of how often he uses the language of racial resentment, does he just not have the credibility to do anything to fix this problem?
Yeah, this president started his campaign in 2016 on a path of racial resentment and fanning the flames of bigotry. That's how he believes he won in 2016. That's how he thinks he's going to win in 2020. Unfortunately, he doesn't have any credibility anymore. You know, when he didn't step up right away and condemn the neo-Nazis after Charlottesville, allowing that crowd for 13 seconds to chant "Send her back" a couple of weeks ago, he doesn't have any credibility. But you know what, Chuck? Like all Americans, I hope, I still hope that this president will do what most presidents have done throughout our history, which is to realize that we have to do everything that we can to try and unite Americans instead of fanning the flames of bigotry.
Do you
he has
worry
to
that
be a big enough man, a big enough person in these moments to do that?
George P. Bush called this white terrorism.
So there you have it. That was the fifth of the 5 Democratic presidential candidates that I'm showing you, all making different varieties of arguments that President Donald Trump is a racist and a white nationalist. Even Pete Buttigieg, what did he say? That white nationalism is condoned at the highest levels. Well, that's our president, right? And that while he is not like legally responsible for these anti-immigrant acts of violence, there is some sort of responsibility to create a better climate, not say the nasty things he's been saying, inciting hatred. It's even though, he's not the one who can be criminally prosecuted, and we have free speech in this country, so it's very difficult to find people liable for saying things. The Supreme Court has set the liability level for incitement. You have to intend to incite violence, and it has to be reasonably likely. Is it reasonably likely? Likely. But it has to be likely that you're actually going to produce that violence. And at least Bernie Sanders gave Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt that he doesn't actually intend to incite the violence. And it also has to be imminent. So, I don't know. Legal liability, no, but moral responsibility. You heard 5 different Democrats there arguing various levels of moral responsibility for Donald Trump's racist, anti-immigrant rhetoric, and not just this attack, but other violent attacks we've seen, and probably not the last. But before I finish, I want to show you a couple of Republicans giving the other side. One kind of dodging, and one being the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, in this next clip. He did show up on Meet the Press and say pretty much the same thing about whether Trump is responsible to sort of he says, well, some supporter of Bernie Sanders shot up a baseball field full of Republicans, and we don't blame Bernie Sanders. And, well, my answer to that is, well, Bernie Sanders didn't spend like a month saying that baseball is ruining America, baseball is invading America, baseball is infesting America, baseball is evil. If Bernie Sanders had done that, maybe he would have some more responsibility for someone going and shooting up this baseball game. And then there's this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez example where someone went and tried to attack one of the Trump immigrant concentration camps and used the word concentration camps just like AOC did. But there, I think the responsibility might be more with the people who set up these camps where they cage children and hold people who are seeking asylum, who haven't done anything wrong, that technically fit the definition of concentration camp, if you know what a concentration camp is. But Anyway, I've sort of pre-criticized Mick Mulvaney's answer. I'll talk a little bit more about that after we watch Jonathan Karl in 2 minutes of his interview with the acting White House Chief of Staff. Why is he acting? It's not like it's even a confirmed position. He could just drop the acting himself anytime he wanted. Why doesn't he want to? Does it make him seem like he has less blame? He's less of a collaborator? Well, I don't know. After this answer, I don't think so. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section after we watch together over here.
Followed through on some of his promises.
We've heard Beto O'Rourke say that the president's rhetoric is fueling more hate in this country. The president has used, as you well know, words like invasion to talk about illegal immigrants. He tweeted at those 4 progressive congresswomen, all women of color, saying they should go back to their countries. Isn't this kind of rhetoric, and especially in light of what we just seen, isn't it just dangerous?
Let's not lose sight of the fact that Beto O'Rourke, a former colleague of mine who I hold in high regard, is running for president, and to the extent he can make this an issue, he's going to. So here's the question you could ask Beto, and I would if he were sitting here. It's a fair question, I think, to ask, which is, look, did anyone blame Bernie Sanders for the congressional baseball game shooting? No, I don't think so. Did anyone blame Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for the the crazy guy who tried to blow up the DHS office in Washington State, taking, I think, a homemade bomb and an AR-15 to shoot up what he called a concentration camp? The exact same rhetoric that AOC was using. Did anybody blame her? Look, there's no benefit here to trying to make this a political issue. This is a social issue, and we need to address it as that.
But you know this is more than Beto O'Rourke. What do you say to Americans who look at what happened in El Paso and say that the president's rhetoric is in part to blame? What do you say to those Americans? You know there are many.
The president is just as saddened by this as you are. The president is just as angry by this as you are and wants to do something about it just as much as everybody else does. I hate to draw attention to the manifesto, but if you actually go and look at it, what the guy says is that he's felt this way a long time before Donald Trump got elected president. This was a sick person. The person in Dayton was a sick person. No politician is to blame for that. The people responsible here are the people who pulled the trigger. We need to figure out how to create less of those kinds of people as a society and not trying to figure out who gets blamed going into the next election.
I want to read you something that George P. Bush.
I keep cutting before they go to George P. Bush. That there was actually a statement from George P. Bush from the George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush family. He's I think like land commissioner in Texas, I think, which is a statewide office, and he came out and called it white national or white terrorism or white nationalist terrorism. So at least there's some Republican somewhere who's trying to name the name or whatever. I thought that Mick Mulvaney answer was very disingenuous. I pretty much pre-criticized it before I showed it. And I want to contrast it with this next clip, who is Tim Scott, who after Will Hurd is the only black Republican in the House of Representatives. Tim Scott is in the Senate. Tim Scott will be the only black Republican in Congress after Will Hurd. Will Hurd just announced his retirement. He's a Republican from Texas. I don't know. Last week I called him like a reasonable Republican. Is that why he had to retire? I don't know. Probably not related to what I said, but Tim Scott here I think shows how you sort of deflect rather than try to defend Trump. Major Garrett starts with this quote from American Carnage, but he lets Tim Scott get away with saying that Trump is being very clear and is, directly addressing when, as we've seen from the previous clips, Trump never called it domestic terrorism, white nationalism, white supremacy, racism. None of those things about El Paso, but Major Garrett from CBS's Face the Nation. Major Garrett used to be on Fox News, so maybe that's why he lets Tim Scott get away with saying this nice thing about President Trump that is definitely not true in the final news clip that I will watch with you tonight over here.
Senator Scott, on that topic, you mentioned silence, and that's not acceptable. I want to read to you a quote from a book that just was published by Tim Alberta called American Carnage. It relates a conversation you had with President Trump. I want to quote from it directly. I know what fear looks like. I think fear typically comes with anger and hostility. You're afraid that you're losing something, that you won't have something that you used to have. I think people who march with torches, who want to resurrect a thankfully dead part of who we were, these are people who are afraid. Trump took all this in, rarely interrupting. What can I do to be helpful? He finally asked. What would you say to President Trump this morning about what he has said, the atmosphere he's created, and in his words, what he can do to be more helpful?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that we need to take a step back from politicizing every event. This is an issue of human hate, something that resides in the heart, and that is actually, unfortunately, because of social technology and the social media, we're seeing it connected to other folks who have hate in their heart as well. What I'd say to everyone, from the president to my house, is that we should take responsibility for how we respond to the situations. I'm thankful that the president's response to this situation has been clear and decisive. I would hope that we would always have that clarity and decisive response in the face of hate and rage and racism. But it goes beyond that. We have to build a better society, a society where we all see that we are in the same boat. Poking holes or shooting holes in that boat only leads to casualties. All of us will be the casualty. Everyone looks in this world to America as the city on the hill, the bright light within the stars. We have to act consistent with our values if we are to maintain the position, not as a superpower economically, but as a moral compass for this world to follow. I think we can do that. I know that we have done it, and I believe that we will do it again.
I don't know if you had a chance to hear him, but Sherrod Brown.
Now, I usually don't find what Tim Scott says offensive. Like I said, it was kind of a dodge, and there was definitely dishonest or disingenuous or naive to say that President Trump was clear and decisive on this issue and mentioning racism, because he didn't call it racism, he didn't call it anti-immigrant, he didn't call it white nationalist terrorism. I think he called it an act of cowardice, which, I mean, is that really cowardice to like go and I mean, of all the things it is, I mean, I guess shooting unarmed people, that's cowardice. So at least to that extent, I would agree with it. But anyway, that was the final news clip. Before I go, I do have a Dash and Sandy clip that I'm going to show you, but I do want to thank the one person who gave me a super chat contribution here. Thank you for that, because, you know, the last couple weeks my videos have been demonetized for at least 24 hours, which is when I get all the views, and this week I'm talking about a shooting, so what are the odds it'll probably won't even get monetized at all, and so I appreciate those super chat contributions. I saw someone in the comments along the live comments along the way saying that they gave a PayPal contribution. And I did see that $10 PayPal contribution. It doesn't show up as a super chat contribution, but since you gave a shipping address, that means you will be getting this ACLU Constitution and this weatherproof vinyl #LiberalViewer sticker. At the $10 level, you get that. At the $5 level, you just get the sticker if you give a shipping address. Same thing goes at the $10 and $5 level to Patreon contributors, a link down in the video description. And sometime before the end of the summer, I will be setting up YouTube channel memberships where you can also join my channel and get those rewards. And I'll be talking about a few other things that hopefully will get more people to want to contribute financially to my channel for the next year, so I can keep it going all the way through the 2020 election. I'll be talking more about that in the next several weeks, like I said, before the end of the summer. But for those of you who are waiting for the Dash and Sandy clip at the end, some people have said that the Dash and Sandy clips aren't live. Dash and Sandy aren't even here. It's from a long time ago. I have seen that conspiracy theory. I don't know if this totally debunks it, but this is You can hear Fox News Sunday from this morning, their panel discussion playing in the background. Though I suppose if you're a real conspiracy theorist, you could say I edited this in. But this is interaction from Dash and Sandy. You can see some mewing from Dash the cat and rubbing up against the doorway while Sandy looks on over here.
Assault weapons off the table.
I think it's going to be a very difficult sell for a lot of people to say, let's punish law-abiding citizens and curtail their rights, their constitutional rights, in order to prevent something like this from happening when I don't know yet, we don't have all the information. Would that have actually prevented what happened last night and yesterday in Texas?
So there you have it. The show for the day. Sorry it was delayed for the live viewers. Like I said, 4 hours of State of the Union and some other things delayed the show as well. So I hope you appreciate the... Usually it's like 8 to 10 hours more. Today was more like 10 to 12 hours I spent watching all the shows and picking out all the clips and preparing it all and broadcasting it. If you appreciate the time I spent, you can give me a thumbs up, give me supportive comments, or support my videos financially on one-time or monthly basis at links down in the video description. I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for the foreseeable future, even if sometimes I end up delayed. And until I'm back with another video or another Sunday live clip roundup, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.